Okay, so in the last video, we kind of introduced what a commodity futures exchange is and kind of recap real quick. There's two main types of people that are going to get into the commodity futures exchange. Those that are looking to make a profit off of it and those that are looking to reduce price risk. And ultimately what a commodity futures exchange is going to do is it's going to take those that are looking to reduce that price risk and transfer that risk over to somebody who's looking to make a profit. That's the ultimate goal of it. So before we really get diving into the technicalities and really how these commodity future exchange works, we are going to cover a couple of quick things. Number one, we're going to talk about the location of these trading, specifically here in the United States first and foremost. The main place, the main location where we're going to find a lot of these futures exchanges is going to be located in Chicago. So in the last slide, we talked about the history of these commodity exchanges and how it began in Chicago. Well, it still remains the major hub here in the United States for these futures exchange. It's the home of the CME Group, or the Chicago Mercantile Exchange Group. Now, we're going to dive into the Chicago Mercantile Exchange Group real quick. The CME Group contains several different other aspects, including the actual Chicago Mercantile Exchange, Chicago Board of Trade, Kansas City Board of Trade, and then this New York Mexico trade as well. So what really is being traded in the Chicago Board of Trade? The CBOT. So the CBOT, Chicago Board of Trade, is going to deal more with commodities like corn, soybeans, soybean oil, soybean meal, wheat, a lot of those actual row crops, those primary row crops we find here in the United States. The Chicago Mercantile Exchange, on the other hand, we're looking at more of those live animals, and we're looking at the meat sector, and we're looking at stuff like lean hogs, live cattle, stocker cattle, feeder cattle. We get into the Kansas City Board of Trade, the KC BOT, and we're looking more at red hard winter wheat and some of the wheats in that aspect. So beyond just the CME Group here in the United States, we also deal with the Intercontinental Commodities Exchange, or ICE. So in the Intercontinental Commodities Exchange, we're dealing with commodities that are traditionally produced outside of the United States and that we import a lot of them into, stuff like coffee. Cotton is even though we produce a lot of cotton here in the United States, it is a major international commodity, so it falls under the same category. Orange juice is more of an international commodity. Sugar, ethanol, cocoa, certain ones, especially stuff like cocoa and coffee, are actually produced primarily outside of the United States. But all of these are major international commodities, and they fall under this International Commodities Exchange realm. So what about locations outside of the United States? It's not just the United States that has these commodity futures exchange. Some of the major ones outside of the United States includes this China Dalian Exchange, where they're going to be dealing with a lot of non-GMO soybeans and other commodities and other non-GMO commodities. Here in the United States, we deal primarily with GMO commodities, where these non-GMO ones are going to be located more in this exchange right here. We also deal a lot with another major trading group is this Brazilian Mercantile and Futures Exchange that's located outside of the United States. But why do we care so much about these commodities or these commodity future exchange groups outside of the United States? What's the importance of them? Well, what we're finding out in today's world is that we're a lot more globalized than we've ever been. We do a lot of trading internationally. We buy a lot of commodities from other countries. They buy a lot of commodities from us. And that price risk is still there. So we're still trying to minimize that price risk, even though we're trading outside of the United States. So because we see a lot of that, we're seeing an emergence in this importance of these non-U.S. commodity exchanges as well. And one aspect that's facilitating that is technology, and actually this online trading that we're going to talk about here in just a second. But because of technology, we can now engage in the Brazilian Mercantile Exchange, and we can engage in these other non-U.S. commodities futures exchanges, as well as other countries can engage a lot in the CME Group and a lot of these commodity exchanges here in the United States. Because of technology and this online trading, we are now more international than we have been before. And because commodity exchanges do increase or are increasing globally, because we are dealing with more of international commodities, we're dealing a lot more with these international groups, and a lot of our commodities are being sold to other countries, and we are dealing more on a global sense. Now, I said we're going to get into electronic trading, and here we go. Electronic trading has more or less been a game changer in the commodity futures exchange. Whereas before you actually had to be present to buy and sell commodity futures, now you can do it from a click of a button on your computer. This has actually increased this efficiency in placing trades. We can now do this a lot easier because it reduces a lot of these transaction costs. First and foremost, it reduces the need for somebody to be right there physically present. So that's reducing that transaction cost. And because it reduces that transaction cost, everything is run instantaneously. It's increasing this efficiency in trading and placing these trades. Now, here's the downside to that. This increased efficiency also increases the ease of placing trades as an individual. Now, it's a lot easier for individuals, whereas before it needed to be brokers that were placing these trades, and it still does need to be brokers, but it's not as difficult to place these, make these trades electronically because you don't actually have to physically be there present. Needing to be there physically present was a major limiting factor for a lot of individuals. Well, because that's no longer the case, because of electronic trading, it makes it easier to place these trades as an individual. But what you need to be careful on is if you're placing these trades as an individual, the error falls completely on the trader. As we get further into this, we can see how risky it is to be a hedger, which is something that we're going to talk about a little bit later on, and how risky it can be to be a hedger. And if you lose money, that falls completely and totally on the trader. Whereas if you're going through a third-party broker, some of the responsibility may fall on the broker, and reducing the responsibilities directly on that trader. So just because it's easier does not mean it's any safer, and it's definitely not any safer. Now, the next section we're going to get into is we're going to start diving into the actual nuts and bolts of this and how do these commodity futures exchange actually work. We're going to be talking about the aspects such as number of buyers and number of sellers, and we're going to be talking about contracts. We're going to be talking about other terminologies such as these section down here. We're going to introduce you to terms such as futures, options, hedgings, puts, calls, longs, shorts, strike prices, margin calls, premiums, and the list goes on and on. There's a long list of different terminology that we're going to introduce you to in this chapter. But what you need to remember above all is this nice concept that in order for you to make money, you should always buy low and sell high. The ultimate goal of these, especially the hedgers who are trying to make a profit, is going to buy low and sell high. And the ultimate goal of the producer is to buy low and sell high and try to minimize their price risk in between, and that's why they're getting into this. So as we get further into this chapter, just please always remember, buy low and sell high.